The wind of Cinderash Basin rose like a warning when she stepped into the open. A lone figure carved out of heat and red dust. Anna didn't slow, didn't flinch, not even when the basin wind dragged her hair across her cheek like black fire. She walked straight toward the man standing at the fence line of Heart's Hollow, a man who looked as if silence had been carved into his bones. Gideon Hart stilled, one hand on the rope he'd been tying. Sunlight sharpened the angles of his face, but his eyes, gray-blue like a dry river that once ran deep, held their ground when hers met his. Anna stopped a breath away. The space between them tightened like drawn wire. Then she spoke, voice low, steady, dangerously calm. They warned you, I'll make you lose your mind. Yet here you stand. Something shifted in the heat between them. Small, sharp, undeniable. Before we continue the story, take a moment to comment below and tell me where you're watching from and why Wild West love stories speak to you. Your thoughts help this tale reach the folks who truly feel its heartbeat. Cinderash Basin spread wide and harsh beneath the late afternoon sun, a bowl of scorched earth where heat shimmered above the ground like restless spirits. The land carried the scent of baked stone and distant cedar, and the wind, always unsettled, always whispering, dragged fine ash-colored dust across every surface. Nothing here softened easily. Not the earth, not the light, not the people who stayed long enough to call it home. Heart's Hollow sat at the northern lip of the basin, a weather-worn ranch clinging to a strip of stubborn grass in a nearly dead creek bed. The cabin's timber had darkened under years of sun. The porch boards sagged but held, and the barn stood steady despite its bleached, brittle planks. Beyond it lay Whisper Creek, a narrow scar of white stones and cracked mud, a place where water once carved its way with purpose. Now it lay silent, a memory left in the open. Anna paused at the edge of that quiet world, letting the air settle against her skin. She was Apache by birth and by spirit, the daughter of a people who read the land the way others read scripture. Dust clung to the folds of her dress, but her posture remained unbowed. Her eyes, dark, clear, and steady, told their own history. A woman who had known the weight of false judgment and had learned to stand taller because of it. A faint pale mark circled her wrist, half hidden beneath a leather eyes. It looked like the ghost of a burn, though the story behind it stayed locked behind her calm expression. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived more than she ever spoke aloud. Even now, after days of being pushed out, erased, cast aside, she moved with the grace of someone who refused to break. Gideon Hart watched her from the fence line, the way a man watches a storm he can't quite predict. He was broad-shouldered but not imposing. His strength was built from years of hauling feed, mending rails, and fighting the kind of loneliness that crept in at night when the world went still. A pale scar cut along his jaw, the kind left by something sharp, life or blade. His shirt sleeves were rolled high, revealing forearms hardened by labor. Yet his movements held a cautious gentleness, as though he'd learned that the land and people both bruised easily. Heart's Hollow was a refuge he didn't speak of, a place where he'd buried memories he wasn't ready to face. In the dim corner of his cabin lay a guitar, untouched for years, its strings coated in dust like a secret he refused to name. His wife, Alora, had loved its sound. Since the day he lost her to fever, Gideon had shut himself behind work and silence, speaking only when necessary, feeling only when alone. Now facing this woman who arrived with dust in her hair and fire in her voice, something in him shifted. A flicker, quiet but undeniable. A ridge hawk circled overhead, its shadow gliding across the basin floor. Anna's gaze followed it for a moment before returning to Gideon, as if measuring whether this place was still capable of mercy. Gideon, in turn, studied the steadiness in her stance, the unspoken challenge in her silence. Between them lay Cinderash Basin, harsh, scarred, waiting. Yet for the first time in a long while, the land did not feel entirely empty. Harlan Peak didn't linger. He tipped his hat toward Gideon, muttered something about losing daylight, and climbed back onto his wagon. The mule stomped once, snorted, and the wheels creaked into motion. Dust lifted behind him like a curtain being drawn, and within moments the wagon disappeared down the slope, leading out of Heart's Hollow. The quiet he left behind was almost jarring. Anna stood alone in the open yard framed by sun-glazed dust, while Gideon remained by the fence line, one palm still wrapped around the rope he hadn't finished tying. For a moment, neither moved. It wasn't hostility that filled the space. It was caution, uncertainty, and something else neither had words for yet. "The bunkhouse is yours," Gideon said first, voice low and clipped. "A cot, a roof. Nothing fancy." Anna inclined her head. No plea, no desperation, just acceptance, steady and unafraid. The lack of fear unsettled him more than fear would have. "You came out here alone?" he asked. "I did," she said, her tone neither defensive nor apologetic. Gideon watched her carefully. Some people hid behind silence. Anna carried silence like a blade, sharp, controlled, and purposeful. It made him wary in a way he couldn't quite explain. They walked toward the barn, each keeping their distance, their footsteps falling out of sync before slowly, almost unwillingly, finding a similar rhythm. The ground shifted beneath them, soft here, packed hard there, baked by relentless sun. Rust, the most temperamental of Gideon's horses, lifted his head the moment they approached. The gelding didn't tolerate strangers. He barely tolerated Gideon on his worst days. But as Anna neared, the horse's ears pricked forward instead of back. He stepped closer, sniffing the air, then touched his nose to her wrist as if greeting someone familiar. Gideon stopped, cold. "Russ doesn't do that," he muttered, unable to hide the edge in his voice. Anna brushed her fingers along the horse's cheek with quiet confidence. "Animals don't fear what speaks softly," she said. Gideon didn't know whether she meant her voice, her presence, or something deeper he wasn't ready to acknowledge. A gust kicked dust across the yard, wrapping their boots in red haze. Sunlight caught in Anna's eyes, revealing not just resolve, but a flicker of exhaustion buried so deep it had turned into a kind of strength. Gideon recognized that look, someone who'd lost something they shouldn't have had to lose. "Harlan said you're looking for work," he said. "I'm looking for a place where lies don't set the rules," she answered. The words dropped between them like a stone. Gideon didn't ask what she meant. He knew the tone of someone carrying a wound and guarding it with their life. "Fair enough," he said. "Work starts before sunrise, hard work. I'm not afraid of hard things." "You afraid of anything?" he asked, not sure why the question left his mouth. Anna glanced toward the dry ribbon of Whisper Creek, its white stones glowing against the basin floor. "I'm afraid of things that pretend to be truth," she murmured. The wind paused as if listening. Gideon followed her gaze to the creek bed, and for a moment, maybe imagination, maybe not, he felt the faintest stir beneath the earth. He cleared his throat. "I won't ask about your past. A beat, as long as it doesn't follow you here." Anna turned back to him, the corners of her mouth lifting in a thin, knowing smile. "The past always follows," she said softly. "It just doesn't always get invited inside." Gideon didn't have an answer, so he let the silence settle again. Yet this silence felt different. No longer a barrier, but a beginning neither of them intended, and neither could stop. They stood there under the raw New Mexico sun, two guarded souls measuring each other in quiet breaths, unaware that Cinder Ash Basin had already begun shifting beneath their feet. The rhythm of Heart's Hollow settled around Anna slowly, like dust drifting into the seams of an old coat. Each dawn found her awake before the light reached the basin floor. The sky at that hour held a faint bruise of purple and gray, and the cold bit at her knuckles as she hauled water from the well. Gideon noticed the changes without meaning to, how the buckets were already filled by the time he stepped out, how the yard looked swept clean, how the feed sacks sat neatly stacked beside the barn. He didn't thank her. She didn't expect him to. Yet a quiet pattern formed between them, one neither spoke of. When Anna chopped wood, Gideon stacked it afterward. When Gideon repaired a broken rail, Anna sanded the splinters smooth once he walked away. When she returned from gathering sage and stone flower near the ridge, he found himself studying her hands, the way leaves and dust clung to her skin as though the land itself recognized her. Their conversation stayed sparse, but their awareness of each other grew heavier with every passing day. One afternoon, the sun sharp as a blade overhead, Gideon caught sight of Anna near Whisper Creek. She knelt in the dry bed, selecting stones with careful fingers and arranging them along the edge as though following an invisible pattern. He approached quietly, but she sensed him before he spoke. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Setting the water's memory," she answered, her voice barely above the wind. Gideon frowned slightly, not in disbelief but in puzzlement. "What does that mean?" She picked up another stone, gray and cool to the touch, and placed it beside the others. When water leaves a place, the land forgets how to listen. Stones help it remember. He didn't laugh or dismiss her words. Instead, he lowered himself onto the bank beside her, resting his forearms on his knees. The two of them sat there, eyes following the empty curve of the creek bed, as though listening for something too faint for ordinary ears. Later that week, Gideon returned from the far fence line to find Anna seated on a low stool, a strip of leather stretched across her lap. She worked an awl through it, repairing one of his saddles. Her braids slipped over her shoulder with each movement, dark against the dusty afternoon light. "You know your way around tack," Gideon said. Anna didn't look up. "Leather listens if you respect it." It was a simple statement, but something in her tone, steady, unforced, made Gideon pause. He stood there longer than he meant to, his shadow falling across her hands. She finally lifted her gaze to him, and the calm he found there startled him. Not passive, not submissive, just certain. Certain in a way he had forgotten people could be. "Why do you work so hard?" he asked. Anna returned to the saddle. "Because this place hasn't lied to me yet." Gideon's breath tightened a little. Heart's Hollow had been a shelter for him, yeah, but also a prison he built for himself after losing Alora. Hearing someone else say the land felt honest, it shifted something in him, something he thought long dead. That evening, as dusk settled like smoke over the basin, Anna carried a bundle of dried herbs to the porch. Gideon sat there, leaning against the post. Alora's guitar rested beside him. He didn't play it, he rarely even touched it. But tonight he had taken it out of the corner where dusk claimed all forgotten things. Anna sat on the steps below him. The air smelled of cooling sand and sagebrush. The land held its breath as night crept over the basin. "She sang, didn't she?" Anna asked softly, glancing at the guitar. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Alora loved music. I didn't. Or maybe I just didn't know how to anymore after—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Anna didn't ask for the pieces he wasn't ready to hand over. Instead, she said, "Songs stay in the wood long after the hands that played them are gone." A quiet breeze passed between them, stirring the lantern flame beside the door. Gideon turned the guitar slightly, his thumb brushing a string. A faint note vibrated, small and trembling. Anna watched him with eyes that held no pity, only understanding. And in that moment, something loosened inside him. The tight, bitter silence he had wrapped around himself since the night Alora died. Later, when Gideon rose to check the horses, he noticed Anna watching the horizon. The last colors of daylight washed over her face, softening the sharp lines of her past wounds. He wondered briefly suddenly how someone who had been cast out with so much cruelty could still carry herself with this kind of steadiness. She sensed his gaze and turned slightly, meeting his eyes. "You don't ask many questions," she said. "Neither do you," he answered. She looked toward Whisper Creek, its stones pale in the dusk. "Some truths grow slow," she murmured, "but when they come like water." Gideon didn't understand the full meaning of her words. Not yet, but he felt them land somewhere deep, somewhere dry, somewhere waiting. And for the first time since he buried Alora, he felt something inside him shift, like a creek bed stirring under the promise of rain. The heat changed first. Not the usual dry burn of Cinder Ash Basin, but a restless, uneasy warmth that pressed low against the skin. By late afternoon, even the horses grew unsettled, stamping and tossing their heads as if some unseen hand tugged at their nerves. The wind, normally a constant companion here, died into a heavy stillness. Anna felt it before Gideon did. She had been sweeping dust from the porch when the air shifted, a subtle tightening that slid along her spine. She paused, fingers tightening on the broom handle, eyes narrowing toward the barn. Gideon emerged from the corral at the same moment, wiping sweat from his brow. "You feel that?" she asked quietly. He did, and he didn't like it. The sun dropped lower, staining the land with a copper hue. The basin held its breath. Then came the smell, faint at first, then unmistakable. Burning hay. Anna didn't hesitate. She dropped the broom and ran. The barn crackled with the first licks of flame along a stack of coyote dry hay. Fire climbed fast, eager, fed by weeks of heat. Smoke curled upward in hungry spirals. "Anna!" Gideon shouted as he sprinted after her, but she was already there, grabbing a shovel, beating at the flames with desperate precision. He seized the bucket, filled it from the water barrel, and threw it over the fire. Steam hissed. The flames leapt back, furious but not yet beyond control. Together they fought it. They moved without wasted motion. She smothered embers with dirt. He hauled water as fast as his arms could lift it. Heat scorched their faces. Smoke burned their throats, and the floorboards beneath their boots shuddered with the force of the blaze. A burning beam cracked above them. Gideon grabbed Anna's arm, yanking her back a breath before it fell. Her sleeve burned at the edge. She slapped it out without flinching. Their eyes met through the smoke, his wide with fear, hers strangely calm. "This didn't start on its own," she said. He didn't want to believe it, but he did. They kept fighting until the flames weakened, shrinking into smoldering piles of blackened straw. Anna knelt, coughing, hands raw and reddened. Gideon dropped beside her, breathing hard. "You're hurt," he said. "I'm alive," she replied, voice rough. Then hoofbeats, not the staggered rhythm of a single rider, 4, maybe 5. Fast. Gideon stood, breath tightening. Anna rose beside him, and together they stepped out into the open yard. Barrett Sloan reined his horse to a stop at the fence line, dust billowing around him like smoke from a second fire. Behind him were 3 men from Sloan's Crossing, neighbors who should have known better. Barrett looked directly at Anna. "Well," he drawled, voice oily with triumph, "looks like trouble followed you here after all." Gideon stepped in front of her without thinking. Not dramatic, not heroic, just solid. A wall of quiet resolve. "What do you want, Sloan?" Gideon asked. Barrett leaned forward in the saddle, a cruel smile cutting across his face. "I came to see the damage. Seems your guest brought her curse with her." A murmur rippled among the men behind him. Anna stepped out from behind Gideon, not hiding. Her hair was singed at one end, and her forearm bore a fresh burn, but her posture was straight, unshaken. "You know I didn't start that fire," she said. Barrett barked a laugh. "Don't I? Funny how flames follow you wherever you go." Gideon's voice dropped a tone. "Watch your mouth, Barrett." Barrett ignored him. "Back in Sloan's Crossing, folks warned me about you, Hart. They said you'd fall for her tricks. Same way I nearly did." Anna's jaw clenched, but she didn't lower her gaze. "You nearly died," she said. "I dragged you out. I kept you alive until help came." Barrett shrugged. "Or maybe you bewitched me. Hard to tell with your kind." Gideon stepped forward, boots grinding into the dirt. "Enough." Barrett slid off his horse, swaggering closer. "Careful, Hart. She'll make you lose your mind. That's what she does. Ask anyone." "I trust what I see," Gideon said, voice steady as a grindstone. "And tonight I saw her save this place." Barrett's face twisted. The men behind him exchanged uncertain looks. Anna lifted her burned arm, the skin red, blistering in places. "If I wanted fire, I wouldn't have fought it." The truth hung in the air like smoke. Barrett took another step, jaw tight. "She doesn't belong here." Gideon met his stare. "She does." Barrett froze at that, for the first time. Something like true anger, raw, personal, flashed in his eyes. "You'll regret this." Barrett spat. Gideon didn't blink. "Not today, not tomorrow." A gust of wind swept across the yard then, swirling dust between them. And from the dry stones of Whisper Creek came a sound, faint, almost nothing. A drip, then another. Barrett heard it, so did his men. Their expressions shifted with unease. Anna didn't turn toward the creek. She just breathed out, long and steady, as if the land itself had answered a question she hadn't dared speak aloud. Barrett swung into his saddle roughly. "This isn't over." But the certainty in his voice had cracked. He rode off into the dark, his men trailing behind in uneasy silence. Only when their hoofbeats faded did Gideon turn to Anna. She was still standing tall, smoke-stained, burned, exhausted, but unbroken. "You saved my home," he said quietly. Anna shook her head. "No, I saved what was worth saving." The night settled around them, cool now, almost gentle, and from the creek bed came one more sound, a soft trickle as if water remembered its way home. For a long moment after Barrett and his men disappeared into the darkness, nothing in Cinder Ash Basin moved. The night felt stunned, as if the land itself struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The fire had been beaten back, the accusations thrown into the dust, and the creek, dead for years, whispered faintly beneath the stones. Gideon exhaled a slow, deliberate breath before turning to Anna. The firelight flared against her skin, revealing burns along her forearm and soot streaking the curve of her cheek. Her braid was frayed, her sleeves singed, yet she stood as if untouched by fear. Only the trembling of her fingers betrayed the cost of what she had just done. "You're hurt," Gideon said softly. Anna's gaze flicked to the scorched skin on her arm. "It will heal. Come inside." His tone left no room for argument, not protective in a way that caged, but steady in a way that invited, a way she was not used to. She followed him into the cabin. The lantern on the table cast a warm, uneven glow across the wooden walls. Gideon pulled a basin of water closer, dipped a cloth, and reached for her arm, but she stopped him gently. "Let me," she whispered. He hesitated, then allowed her to guide his hand instead. She lowered herself onto the bench, offering her arm with quiet dignity. The cloth brushed her burned skin, and she inhaled sharply, not from pain alone, but from the strangeness of letting someone tend to her. Gideon was careful, every movement measured. "Why didn't you stay back?" he asked. Anna watched him, eyes steady. "Because when something matters, you don't wait for someone else to save it." He looked down. The truth in her words hit deeper than she knew. "Allura used to say that," he murmured. Anna didn't flinch at the name. "Your wife." Gideon nodded once. "She died while I was away. Fever. I wasn't there to hold her hand." His voice thickened, but he continued. "I told myself the silence after would break me if I ever cared again. So I stopped letting myself care." Anna studied him, seeing the places he rarely allowed anyone to see. "Silence isn't a punishment," she said. "It's a place where wounds hide until you choose to name them." He looked at her, then really looked. The exhaustion, the smoke on her skin, the unwavering strength in her posture, all of it carved into his chest like a new truth. "You weren't meant to face that fire alone," he said. Anna shook her head. "I've faced worse. Fires burn. People do worse." He paused. "Bear it." Her jaw tightened. Memories flickered across her expression like the dying embers outside. "He nearly died in a fall. I found him, kept him alive for a night. He woke afraid of his own weakness and blamed me for causing it. His mother believed him. The town followed, and they cast you out." It wasn't a question. Anna's eyes dropped to the basin of water where ash floated like black snow. "They said I bewitched him, that I pull men off course, that I ruin lives." She lifted her gaze. "You heard part of that the day I arrived." "I did," Gideon admitted, "and I didn't believe it." "Why?" He didn't look away. "Because lies don't move the way truth does." He touched the clean bandage on her arm. "And the truth is, you saved this place. You saved me." A breath left her, shaky, fragile in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. For once, she didn't hide it. Gideon set the cloth aside and rested his hand lightly over hers. Not a claim, not a demand, just presence. Warm, solid, real. "You don't have to run anymore," he said. "Not from who they made you, and not from who you are." "And who am I to you?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He stepped closer. The space between them narrowed like a heartbeat. "Someone the basin listened to," he said. "Someone who woke what I thought was dead." Anna's breath trembled. She didn't pull away. Outside, a faint trickle of water continued beneath Whisper Creek, the land quietly affirming what neither of them dared speak fully yet. Anna finally closed her hand over Gideon's. "Then let the water decide," she murmured. "It already has," he answered. And for the first time since either of them could remember, the night in Cinder Ash Basin felt full. Not with fear, not with loneliness, but with something just beginning to take its shape. Morning came softly to Cinder Ash Basin, as if the land feared disturbing what had shifted during the night. A pale glow spread across the horizon, brushing the ridges with gold. The basin still carried its desert stillness. But something was undeniably different, subtle yet unmistakable, like the first breath after waking from a long illness. Anna stepped outside before Gideon did. The cool air kissed her skin, easing the heat left by the burns along her arm. The wind, once sharp and restless, moved gentler now, tugging lightly at the ends of her braid. She walked toward Whisper Creek, drawn by the faint sound she'd heard the night before. Gideon joined her quietly, boots crunching over the gravel. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood near enough that their shoulders nearly touched, as if the nearness itself was a language he was still learning to speak. Anna crouched beside the creek bed. The line of stones she arranged days ago remained exactly as she had placed them, only now water threaded between them in a small, shimmering ribbon. Not a stream, not yet, but enough to darken the earth where it passed, enough to bring a scent of coolness into the morning air. "It listened," she whispered. Gideon watched the tiny ribbon of water curve around the stones. "Maybe it finally remembered," he said. Anna dipped her fingertips into the shallow flow. The water clung to her skin, cold and alive. For a moment she closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of something ancient and forgiving moving through the ground beneath them. "This land," she murmured, "it feels different now." Gideon looked at her, at the way the soft light touched her face, at the steadiness she carried even after being burned, accused, cast out. "So do you," he answered. Anna stood slowly, her hand trailing in the air as if leaving the water behind required intention. "For the first time in a long while," she said, "I don't feel like I'm walking through someone else's judgment." "You're not," Gideon replied. His tone wasn't forceful but certain in a way that surprised even him. "Not here, not with me." Their eyes held, quiet as dawn, deep as the earth stirring beneath their feet. Anna took a step closer. "And you," she asked, "do you still carry your silence like a shield?" Gideon's breath left him in something between a sigh and a confession. "I carried it because it was all I had, but now there's something else." She waited. "You," he said simply. The wind rose then, not harsh, not howling, just a soft sweep across the basin, brushing through the sparse grasses and rustling the leaves of the scrub cedar. It carried the scent of wet earth, that rare, precious fragrance that belonged only to places learning how to live again. Anna reached out, letting her fingers graze the back of Gideon's hand, a touch light as water, deliberate as truth. He turned his palm upward, entwining his fingers with hers. They stood together beside Whisper Creek as its thin stream glimmered in the morning light. A promise more than a river, but a promise nonetheless. For years, Cinder Ash Basin had been a place of drought, silence, and ghosts. But now, as two silhouettes leaned gently together over a newborn ribbon of water, the land seemed to acknowledge what the heart already knew. Healing had begun. And from that day forward, folks who passed through the basin said Heart's Hollow didn't look so empty anymore. Some swore they even heard water singing beneath the stones. In the unforgiving expanse of Cinder Ash Basin, where the sun scorches the earth and silence can feel like a lifelong companion, the story of Anna and Gideon Hart teaches us one of life's most tender and powerful truths. Healing begins the moment we choose to see another person beyond the rumors, the scars, and the stories others have written about them. Anna arrives at Heart's Hollow carrying the heavy burden of lies. She is called a witch, a curse, a woman who makes men lose their mind. Yet Gideon, a man who has spent years burying his own grief behind endless work and untouched guitar strings, looks past the warnings. He sees her steady hands, her quiet strength, the way even his wary horse Russ trusts her touch. In offering her shelter, he unknowingly opens the door to his own resurrection. Together they battle literal fire and the flames of prejudice, and in that shared fight, a long-dead creek begins to whisper again. Proof that when two wounded souls choose truth over judgment, life itself can remember how to flow. This is the heartbeat of the lesson. We all carry invisible burns, from loss, betrayal, gossip, or exile. And too often we let other people's stories define who someone is before we ever give them a chance to show who they truly are. Anna teaches us resilience. Gideon teaches us the courage to trust our own eyes and heart instead of the crowd's chorus. Their union reminds us that real connection isn't built on perfection or safety. It's forged in the ashes of vulnerability, in the decision to stand beside someone when the whole world says run. Imagine how many lives could bloom if we all paused long enough to listen, to question the easy labels, and to offer a bunkhouse instead of a closed door. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Or have you ever chosen to look deeper and discovered someone extraordinary beneath the rumors? Or perhaps you've been the one who gave someone a second chance and watched them change your world. Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this tale of quiet courage, second chance, and a creek that learned to sing again moved you, please hit that like button, drop a, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss these heart-stirring Wild West stories that remind us what it truly means to be human. Thank you for being here. Your presence makes every tale feel alive. Keep the conversation going. I can't wait to read your thoughts.